Hi, everybody. Hang on one sec there. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. Had a little illness after Christmas, a little cold, took me out for a while, but we're back. We are in the chapter 20. Oh, what are we? No, not 20. What is it, 12? I think it's chapter 12. Yes. Chapter 12, Sinews of Democracy. And we've been reading the section called Titans of Industry. Now, I am reading from the 15th anniversary edition, as I always do. If you don't have that edition, the page numbers won't line up and some of the headers won't line up. Usually, go back one edition or so, the headers will line up. So that's the best I can tell you, but we're in the chapter 12, and you can find it. And we're starting on page 449, section on John Pierpont Morgan. It's the second full paragraph. John Pierpont J.P. Morgan, while not personally as wealthy as either Rockefeller or Carnegie, nevertheless changed the structure of business more profoundly than either of those two. A contemporary of both men, Morgan was born in 1837, Rockefeller in 1839, and Carnegie in 1835. Morgan started with more advantages than either. Raised in a home as luxurious as Carnegie's was bleak and schooled in Switzerland, Morgan had nevertheless worked hard at learning all the details of business. As a young man, he was strong and tall, and although he suffered from skin disorders that left his prominent nose pockmarked and red, he studied every aspect of the banking and accounting business, apprenticing at Duncan, Sherman and Company, then worked for his father's investment banking office in London. Morgan then joined several partnerships, one with Anthony Drexel, that placed him at the center of many railroad reorganizations. His first real railroad deal, which consisted of a mortgage bond issue of more than $6.5 million for the Kansas Pacific Railroad, to which he lent money. The railroad taught him that he needed to take a personal role in supervising any railroad to which he lent money there. Within years, he was merging, disassembling, and reorganizing railroads as he financed as though they were so many toy train sets. After the Panic of 1873, the failures of several railroads led to a wave of bank bailouts by investment consortia. Excuse me. Most of those roads had received massive government subsidies and land grants and were not only thoroughly inefficient, but were also laced with corruption. Only Hill's Great Northern, financed almost entirely by private funding, survived the purge. As Morgan and his partners rescued railroad after railroad, they assumed control to restore them to profitability. This was accomplished by making railroads, in essence, look much more like banks. Imposing such a structure on many of the railroads improved their operations and brought them into the managerial revolution by introducing them to modern accounting methods and line and staff managerial structures, pushing them toward vertical combinations. On one occasion, during the Panic of 1893, Morgan essentially rescued the federal government with a massive bailout, delivering 3.5 million ounces of gold to the U.S. Treasury to stave off national bankruptcy. Again, during the Panic of 1907, Morgan and his network of investment bankers helped save the banking structure, although by then he recognized that the American commercial banking system had grown too large for him to save it again. By then, his completely rotund shape, stern, almost scowling expression, and bulbous, irritated nose left him a target for merciless caricatures of the, quote, evil capitalist. Although he hardly matched the private philanthropy of Rockefeller or Carnegie, the Atlas-like Morgan had hoisted Wall Street and the entire U.S. financial world on his back several times and held it aloft until it stabilized. If Morgan, Rockefeller, and Carnegie had been the only three prominent American business leaders to emerge in the post-Civil War era, they alone would have composed a remarkable story of industrial growth. The entrepreneurial explosion that occurred in the 1830s, however, only accelerated in the postbellum era, unleashing an army of inventors and corporate founders who enabled the United States to leapfrog past Britain and France in productivity, profitability, and innovation. From 1870 to 1900, the U.S. Patent Office grew more than 400,000 patents, 10 times what was granted in the previous 80 years. The inventors who sparked this remarkable surge owed much to entrepreneurs who generated a climate of risk-taking unknown to the rest of the world, including capitalist Europe and England. Much of the growth derived from the new emphasis on efficiency that came with the appearance of the managerial hierarchies. The goal was to make products without waste, either in labor or in raw materials, and to sell the goods as efficiently as possible. James B. Duke, who founded the American Tobacco Company, used the Bonsack rolling machine to turn out 120,000 cigarettes per day. Charles Pillsbury, a New Hampshire bread maker, invented the purifier that made bread flour uniform in quality. In 1872, he installed a continuous rolling process similar to Duke's mass production and mass-produced flour. By 1889, his mills were grinding 10,000 barrels of flour a day, drawing wheat from the Dakotas, processing it, and then selling it in the East. Henry J. Heinz's pickle empire, Joseph Campbell's soup business, and Gustavus Swift's meat packing plants all use mass processing techniques combined with innovative advertising and packaging to create household brands of food items. Heinz added a flair for advertising by giving away free pickle samples at the 1892-93 Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Campbell's soups and Pillsbury's bread, along with Isaac Singer's sewing machine, saved women huge blocks of time. So did other home products, such as soap, now could be purchased instead of made at home, thanks to British-born soap maker William C. Proctor and his brother-in-law, James Gamble. Procter & Gamble processed and sold Campbell's and soap to the Union Army, mixing and crushing products used for bar soap. By 1880, P&G, as the firm was known, was turning out daily 200,000 cakes of its ivory soap. The soap, by a fluke in which an employee had left a mixing machine on for too long, was so puffed up with air that it floated. Gamble had the advertising hook he needed. Quote, "It floats," announced his ads. And later, when an analysis of the composition of the soap showed that it had only 0.56% impurities, the company proudly announced that its product was, quote, 99.44/100ths pure. Greed and jealousy in the Gilded Age. Not every lumberman held to Frederick Weyerhaeuser's appreciation for replenishing the forests, and not every oil man believed, as Rockefeller did, that kerosene ought to be cheap and widely available for the consumer. So perhaps it was inevitable that even as wages started a sharp upward rise in the late 1800s, and more important, real purchasing power of industrial employees grew at dramatic rates, a widespread dissatisfaction with the system surfaced. Although entrepreneurs abounded, with more appearing every day, the fact of life is that not everyone can be an entrepreneur. Most people, other than farmers, worked for someone else and often labored in a factory or a mine, usually under difficult and occasionally dangerous conditions. Workers in late 1800s often faced tedious, repetitive, and dreary jobs. Plumbers made $3.37 a day, stonemasons $2.58 a day, and farm laborers $1.25 a day, usually for 54 to 60-hour work weeks. In terms of that era's most cost of living, these wages were sufficient, though certainly not generous. 11 pounds of coffee went for $1. A box of chocolate bonbons sold for 60 cents. A shirt might cost $1.50, or a pair of boots 60 cents, and a cigar a nickel. A typical city family in Atlanta would pay on average about $120 per year for food, and all other expenses, including medical care, books, vacations, or entertainments, would cost maybe $85. Can you imagine that? Consider a Scots-Irish family in Atlanta in 1890 with one child, the McGloins, whose main source of income came from the father's job in a textile mill, supplemented by his wife's sewing and rent from a boarder. The husband's textile job brought in $312 a year. The wife's sewing added $40, and the boarder's rent's another $10. In a typical year, though, the family spent nearly $400 paying for the extra expenses out of the credit at the mill store. The McGloins heated their home with wood, used oil lamps for indoor lighting, gave to their church, but only about 1%, spent no more than $40 per week for clothes, per year for clothes, sorry, $40 per year for clothes. That's not even a trip to Marshall's or Target. And dealt frequently with roundworm and, in the case of the child, the croup. The life of the McGloins contrasted sharply with the top end of the income scale, a fact that lay at the root of some of the bitterness and anxiety prevalent in the late 19th century. Greed and jealousy worked from opposite ends to create strife. Greed on the part of owners and industrialists could be seen in the lavish and, to most people, outrageous expenditures that seemed obscene. Certainly nothing seemed more ostentatious than, excuse me, let me shut this off for a second. Hold on, what's going on here? Excuse me, I had the volume turned down and it still comes through. I don't get it. Certainly nothing seemed more ostentatious than the mansions that erected at Newport, Rhode Island, where the on-site cleaning staff lived in houses larger than those owned by most Americans. Newport's froth of castles, as one critic described it, often had more rooms than large hotels. Yet the Newport crowd, in truth, did not seek to impress the proletariat as much as each other. They threw extravagant parties, replete with party favors consisting of diamond necklaces. Attendees lit cigars with $100 bills, while hosts showered gifts on children, friends, and even pets. One owner had a dinner for the family dog, giving the pooch a necklace worth $15,000. One castle had champagne flowing from its faucets. One millionaire had his teeth drilled and filled with diamonds so that he literally flashed $1 million smile. But they were careful not to flaunt their wealth to ordinary Americans. And the only people who knew they were that rich, by the way, were the people who attended the parties and the help. But ordinary people never would have even heard of this, which is a big difference from today. Often the only time New Yorkers saw these millionaires was when they walked down Fifth Avenue in the annual Easter parade in their fine clothes. By the way, that's a big problem today. In that today, the wealthy, the Kardashians, are all over social media and television and the internet. And you see, not just you, people with much more limited means see their incredible, some would say obscene, wealth on display all the time. And it breeds resentment. It's hard to see that and go, something's wrong here. Why do they have all this stuff and we don't? Are they that much better, smarter, talented than I am? Kardashians got their start, as you know, from a porn video. So it is a real issue, and it explains why in the 1800s, while the wealth gap was not quite what it is today, close, but not quite, nevertheless, the unrest wasn't nearly as severe as it is today. And you see that with this recent shooting of this United Healthcare CEO. People think nothing anymore, just going out and snuffing somebody because they don't like how they were treated. America's wealthiest people held between 300 and 400 times the capital of ordinary line workers, creating perhaps the greatest wealth gap between the rich and middle class that the nation has ever witnessed or would see again until the until the early 21st century. The good news was that there were more of the wealthy from 1865 to 1892. The number of millionaires in the nation rose from a handful to more than 4,000. That type of upward mobility seemed inconceivable to farmers who faced foreclosure or to factory workers who, despite the fact they actually had more purchasing power than 20 years earlier, saw their paychecks stagnating. It nevertheless meant that more than ever, America was a land of rags to riches. Still, frustration and jealousy boiled over in the form of calls for specific remedial legislation for what many considered business excesses. Railroads, for example, were excoriated by farmers for the rates they charged, often under the allegation that they enjoyed, quote, monopoly control. Farmers also suffered more than any group when falling prices gripped the economy, deflation. Farm owners held mortgages whose rates did not change when they were getting less for their crops. Mortgages stay the same no matter what. Others argued they could not even get more mortgages because of the lack of competition, since banks and lending agencies were, in theory, scarce in the West. Unquestionably, individuals suffered in some circumstances, but setting anecdotes aside, our measure of the condition of farmers and shippers must be judged by the overall statistics when possible, the application of micro-level studies. Given those criteria, the charges of widespread distress in the excuse me, of widespread distress in the late 1800s must be attributed to the perception more than reality. For example, numerous studies exist on the mortgage market that demonstrate that the mortgages, which only ran for 5 years in that period, can you imagine a 5-year mortgage? Today we have 30-year mortgages. Those are readjusted in current dollars with each renewal, and that the statistic of foreclosures show that, quote, the risk of individual foreclosure was quite small, said one economist, as low as 0.61% in Illinois in 1880 and 1.55% in Minnesota in 1891. Not a high likelihood that you're going to have to renew. Other statistics suggest that the large number of farmers failed, although many may have owned their land free and clear at the time of bankruptcy. Most, however, should not have been farming. Again, government subsidies in the form of absurdly cheap and free land, I'm sorry, my throat, through the Homestead Acts, encouraged westward migration and farming by millions of Americans who, truth be told, were not good farmers. The Homestead Act was in keeping with Jefferson's ideals, but realistically, it was going to be accompanied by large numbers of failures. What about factory laborers? What was the real status of their condition? Because anecdotal evidence is unreliable, we have to depend on more sterile statistical analysis, such as that of economic historian Stanley Liebergott. He traced the real earnings of the era based on 2 series of statistics. It's clear that regardless which series is used, quote, with a brief downturn between 1870 and 1880, real non-farm earnings rose more than 60% from 1870 and 1900. That's a ton. And rose more rapidly after the Civil War than ever before. A similar study by Kenneth Sokoloff and Georgia Villafore concluded that real wages during the period 1865 to 1900 rose about 1.4% per year, which may have been inconsequential until it's remembered that this was a period of deflation. So every place else, prices are going down while real wages are slightly going up. Still other investigations of wages by Clarence D. Long and Paul Douglas showed real wages hitting a trough in 1867, then rising almost unbroken until the Panic of 1893 from $1 to $1.90. Thus, the average labor gained consistently and substantially during the postbellum period. Moreover, Joseph Schumpeter noted that creative destruction of capitalism often produces benefits to second-generation wage laborers while the first generation suffered. Averages conceal the angst and poverty that genuinely afflicted many wage laborers, but such is the case in all societies at all times in history. The issue ultimately comes down to defining the average worker, and the evidence is conclusive that the American laborers were well paid and their standard of living was getting better by the decade. Let's see where we are here. All right, we're going to stop here and pick up next time and finish out this section. So I will see you next time. And remember, if you go into this new season and you need a high school curriculum, we have one in US and one in world history. I teach both these curricula in high production video, really well done stuff. Every chapter of Patriot's History is in video. Both courses come with videos, with home workbooks, teacher's guide, student guide, tests, answer keys. And the US course is based on Patriot's History of the United States and the Reader, and the World History course is based on Patriot's History of the Modern World in Part 2. So check those out. Also, if you want more video lessons that are not a part of the curriculum, you can get individual lessons, or you can buy the whole package. There's over 50 hours of video, and we keep adding to it at the VIP subscription, which is about $6 a month. The most recent video I'm working on is Billy Graham Integrity. We just finished Winston Churchill Integrity, which I think was about 21 videos. So we'll end up with something like that number on Billy Graham. So check those out. And remember, at the very least, if you like what you're seeing, buy me a coffee. Go to the website and buy Larry a coffee, just $5, and say, thanks for what you're doing here, because I make this available to you free. I'll see you next time.